In the year 1099, the Crusader army, fueled by a zealous desire to reclaim the Holy Land, massacred nearly 10,000 Muslim and Jewish inhabitants of Jerusalem, leaving the streets running red with blood and the stench of death hanging in the air. This brutal act of violence, often glossed over in historical accounts, marked the beginning of a centuries-long period of carnage and bloodshed that would come to define the Crusades. The notion that the Crusades were a noble and just endeavor, a defensive war to protect Christendom from the perceived threat of Islam, has been perpetuated by historians and scholars for centuries, but the truth is far more sinister. As the Crusader army marched towards Jerusalem, they left a trail of destruction and devastation in their wake, pillaging and plundering towns and villages, slaughtering entire populations, and selling survivors into slavery. The Crusaders saw themselves as the instruments of God's will, divinely ordained to reclaim the Holy Land from the infidel, and they showed no mercy to those who stood in their way. The chronicler Fulcher of Chartres wrote of the horrors committed by the Crusaders, including the slaughter of Muslims and Jews, and the desecration of holy sites, but his accounts were often sanitized and whitewashed to fit the narrative of a holy and just war. The First Crusade, launched by Pope Urban II in 1095, was a call to arms, a rallying cry to the faithful to take up the cross and reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslim forces that had conquered it centuries earlier. But beneath the rhetoric of holy war and divine purpose, the Crusades were a complex web of political, economic, and social motivations, driven by a desire for power, wealth, and territory. The Crusader leaders, including Bohemond of Taranto and Godfrey of Bouillon, were not altruistic heroes, but rather ruthless and cunning politicians, who used the Crusades as a means to further their own ambitions and interests. As the Crusades dragged on, the violence and bloodshed only intensified, with both sides committing atrocities and war crimes on a massive scale. The Crusaders slaughtered entire cities, including Ansh and Mahara, and the Muslim forces responded in kind, killing and capturing thousands of Crusaders. The war was not just about territory and power, but also about ideology and identity, with both sides convinced that they were fighting for the very survival of their faith and way of life. The Crusaders saw the Muslims as infidels, heretics, and enemies of God, while the Muslims saw the Crusaders as barbaric invaders, driven by a lust for conquest and plunder. The impact of the Crusades was felt far beyond the battlefields of the Middle East, with the violence and hatred spreading to Europe and beyond. The Crusades sparked a wave of anti-Semitic violence, as Jews were blamed for the death of Christ and seen as enemies of the faith. The Rhineland massacres, which took place during the Second Crusade, saw thousands of Jews killed and communities destroyed, and the pogroms continued for centuries, fueled by the same toxic mix of hatred and intolerance that had driven the Crusades. The dark legacy of the Crusades continues to haunt us to this day, with the same poisonous ideologies and hatreds that fueled the wars still present in modern society. The rhetoric of holy war and divine purpose, the demonization of the other, and the glorification of violence and bloodshed, are all still with us, and continue to inspire hatred and intolerance around the world. The Crusades may have ended centuries ago, but their impact on the modern world is still felt, and it is only by confronting the dark truth about the Crusades that we can begin to understand the complexities and nuances of the modern world. The Crusades were not a noble and just endeavor, but a brutal and devastating series of wars, driven by a toxic mix of hatred, intolerance, and ambition. The wars were not about faith or God, but about power, territory, and wealth, and the legacy of the Crusades continues to poison the world to this day. As we look back on the Crusades, we are forced to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, and the horrors that we are capable of inflicting on each other. The streets of Jerusalem, once running red with the blood of the innocent, still echo with the screams of the slaughtered, a haunting reminder of the atrocities that were committed in the name of God, and the enduring legacy of hatred and intolerance that continues to haunt us to this day.